got big concerns about our banking system because the federal government, through the Treasury, has loaned billions of dollars to large banks, who have swallowed up all the small banks. And we're loaning that money as taxpayers to these banks at a little above 0% interest. And then the bank is turning around to pass it on and loan it out to consumers at 4% or more.
That money is being fronted by the taxpayer, by us, by ordinary workers, and what happens is that we take the risk with that huge amount of money, up to $1 trillion. That's $1,000 billion. We stand to gain just a little bit, a fraction of what the banks get, but we stand to lose most of it. So if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, this looks like another Bush-Bolton bank bailout. And we've got to change this whole system of propping up the banks, propping up a system that is not helping the people. That money should be going to health care. It should be going to education, child care, jobs for now and in the future. That's where that money should be going, not to zombie banks, zombie bankers, and zombie shareholders. So let's get that money back into people's needs. These banks that they're calling too big to fail are too big to exist. What we need to know is that anytime they're demanding taxpayer money to keep Wall Street afloat, we've got a real problem. 100 years ago, there was a populist movement that was serious in this country. And the first focus of that populist movement was the banks. And one of the things they demanded was that they be broken up because they were essentially monopolizing the money of this country. We can't allow this to happen again. We need to nationalize these banks, and not nationalize and give them back to Wall Street. We need to nationalize them and keep them under our control, or break them up so they're so small that they will never again need to be bailed out by the taxpayer. We need to, among other things, bring our money home. It is very, very important that we begin to understand that investment is about economic development. It's not about gambling. It's not about going to the casino. We need to decentralize our money. We need to decentralize the banks. We need to make our state government put its money in the state to put people in this state back to work. And we need to put our own personal money in this state. So, on that point, I'm going to bring up Jared Gardner, who's part of a local campaign to do exactly that.
I'm with Real Wealth of Portland, and we have a campaign called Fire Your Banks. We're asking people to fire your national corporate, multinational corporate banks and move your money where your mouth is. We have some tremendous banks, credit unions in town that are serving our community, and that's what we're asking people to do. And so in a minute we're going to be walking to fire a few of our banks in this area, and so we're inviting you to come with us and to move your money. In addition to, like I should say, the national banks are failing us, but there are banks that are working. The community banks and the credit unions are keeping money locally. So if you vote with your dollars, you will have a stronger community. So join us as we move our money.
If we're going to fire our banks, maybe we need to think about firing ourselves as protesters and rehiring ourselves as owners. Yeah. The situation is serious enough that we really are in deep shit, and protest, as valid and necessary as it is might not be up to the task. We need to figure out how to take things over. When, if you look at your history, in the 20 years ago, people in Eastern Europe, there were people who valiantly protested what was going on in Eastern Europe, but when the collapse happened, they were swept aside along with everybody else, and when the dust settled, 5 or 6 people wound up owning whole countries. So we are in that kind of situation here. So we have to get serious. We have to look deep down inside and figure out whether we have the fortitude to move forward and really take control of these institutions before they take control of us entirely. Now when people do that, they form alternative vehicles. What's the vehicle for taking over? And man, I do not have that answer, so I'm not going to pretend I do. I will say that we've been experimenting with creating those vehicles in rural Oregon a little bit because we live in communities, small communities, where there isn't a great jobs with justice, where there aren't a lot of progressive infrastructure that we can tap into. So we have to create our own. And we call them human dignity groups, and they're just the people, your neighbors, who think like you and get together on a monthly basis across a kitchen table, and that's the embryo of progressive infrastructure. And we think that's kind of the embryo that could grow. These things are very resilient. Some of our groups have lasted for 10 years or so. We're thinking about the same things you all are thinking about in the city. We're all going broke. We're all having our credit cards credit cut off and our mortgages recalculated. So we need some kind of thinking about alternative vehicles, councils. When people create revolutions, they create alternative structures of government, so we got to think about that.
You know, we're hearing a lot about things being privatized all the time. Well, we're going in the opposite direction is what we want. Nationalizing. How about nationalizing Pioneer Courthouse Square? By our tax dollars. Yeah, there are probably a few other things we can nationalize as well, like banks.
KGW.
How about
Media.
What media? We are right. We should have a media that's run by the people. How about, what else should be nationalized?
The Fed. PGE.
PGE. How about having an electric utility that's nationalized? How about
Healthcare.
healthcare? Has anyone heard about single-payer healthcare? HR 676. That's healthcare that is in the hands of the people, democratically controlled by the people. You know, we don't want to have the fire station privatized. Well, we shouldn't have healthcare privatized either. So we're going in the opposite direction of the direction that's been going in, that things have been going in the last 30 years, 40 years of privatizing. We're moving to nationalize. So before we start on our, we're going to take a walk around like Wall Street in Portland, some of the main banks in Portland. We have Wall Street in Portland that we want to deal with. And we want to talk about firing the banks in Portland.
When I say banks, you say bust them. Banks.
Bust them.
Banks.
Bust them.
When I say banks, you say bust them. Banks.
Bust them.
Banks, let's bust them. When I say banks, you say bust them. Banks.
Bust them.
Banks.
Bust them.
Bank of America, you have been served. You're fired. All right, here we are, Bank of America. How much? Anybody know how much Bank of America got in TARP funds?
$125 billion.
Oh, that's it? 25 billion?
125. 125.
I think I could have just written them a check. That's nothing. I'm happy to contribute my part. What about you?
No.
No? Well, now that we have contributed our part, don't you think it's time that we own this bank?
Yeah.
Time to shut them down. I want to bring up Jared to read the notice of termination and talk more about the Fire Your Bank campaign. We're here to fire Bank of America due to violent disregard for public welfare, gross mismanagement of our funds, our taxpayer funds, devastating violation of public trust, willful and criminal undermining of the value of assets worldwide, and a personal grievance that we've written, outrageous compensation for these criminals. As we fire our banks, let's move our money to the banks that are working, the community banks and the credit unions. Community development banks, even a state-owned bank. North Dakota has a wonderful state bank that supports their community. So as we fire our bank, let's move our money to productive use. What other grievances do we have with Bank of America? I heard something about a conference call.
They are trying to organize against the Employee Free Choice Act.
Oh my God, that's right. I remember now. That's right. Bank of America hosted a conference call about the upcoming Armageddon, is how they described it. the end of the world as we know it, the Employee Free Choice Act. It's coming, and Bank of America is terrified. And they were rallying their friends, their CEO pals. They had a little conference call to talk about the upcoming Armageddon, the right of workers to organize, and just how terrible that would be, how awful it is that unions want to make it level the playing field just a little bit so that they can organize unions without incredible harassment from the bosses. Bank of America hosted this conference call. They're taking our tax dollars and trying to stop our right to organize unions. We need to shut them down. We need to. If this bank's too big to fail, they're too big to exist.
Yeah.
We need to shut them down, nationalize them, or break them up. One or the other. Let's go to our next bank target. It's right across the street. You ready, drum corps? Lead us over there to Key Bank. All right, here we are. Key Bank. This one's key, right? Relatively small speaking on the bailout scale. This poor little bank only got $2.5 billion. They just don't, I don't know. I think I feel a little sorry for them. Maybe it's because they're just a regional bank. But regionally, while their bailout was small, locally they're a huge player in some of the worst grievances around here. What grievances do we have with Key Bank besides the bailout?
Oak Harbor.
What was that? Oak Harbor?
Oak Harbor.
Well, I haven't heard of this. Oak Harbor? Where is that? What's going on there?
Alright, everybody's seen Oak Harbor trucks. They've got these beautiful leaves on them. They drive stuff to the Gap. They drive stuff to Fred Meyer's, to Nordstrom's, to all the stores that we love to go to all the time, right? Yeah. None. So the guys who drive these trucks, the men and women, are members of Teamsters, the International Brotherhood of the Teamsters in Portland. They're members of Local 81. They just came back from being on strike for 154 days because the company that employs them has been trying to take away their health insurance for retirees. They've been trying to break their union using these strike-breaking companies that they brought in strike breakers from all over the country to bust this union that's been there for over 50 years. They had a union, they never had a strike, they had a good contract, and now Oak Harbor is trying to break their union and take that away from them. 1,000 family wage jobs that were good jobs before this contract battle happened. So these guys have been without a contract for 2 years. They're trying as hard as they can to bargain a new one. But Oak Harbor is able to hold out because they're being funded by Key Bank. Our bailout money is being used to fund these strike breakers and to break this union. So that's why we're here at Key Bank today, to tell them this is not okay. We don't want our taxpayer dollars to go to break unions and to take away people's right to have a decent life. Jobs with Justice, we pulled our money out of Key Bank because that's where we had an account. And anyone else who has an account at Key Bank, you should go in and tell them that this is not okay, that you are not going to bank here until they stop funding Oak Harbor and the Teamsters get a contract.
You are not too big to fail. You have failed. I am moving my money to a local financial institution that better reflects my values, one that is accountable to me and my community. Key Bank, everybody together now. Key Bank, you're fired!
There we go. What I said to you. Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo.
What's going on here?
Hey, they're fired.
Wells Fargo?
You're
Fired! All right. Congratulations, everyone. You made it. All 3 stops. 3 strikes, you're out. Wells Fargo, number 3. Wells Fargo, back up in the big time. Not a measly 2.5 like Key Bank, but Wells Fargo, $25 billion in TARP bailout funds. Your tax dollars. I think $25 billion is enough of investment that you own this bank. So it's time to nationalize this bank. It's time to fire this bank. It's time to break this bank up. This bank is too big to fail, so it's too big to exist in its current form. Wells Fargo! Wells Fargo! Wells Fargo! other grievances with Wells Fargo?
They're fired!
I thought I remember hearing about a grievance with Wells Fargo. Something about the Geo Group. I know we're supposed to be focused on the banks and stuff, but I just got to throw in this little piece. Wells Fargo is an investor in the Geo Group, which runs the Tacoma Immigration Detention Center up in Tacoma, Washington. This is, just like Wells Fargo, this is a privately run prison, technically a holding center for folks that really have no rights. Folks that were arrested at the Del Monte factory here in Portland were taken up to Tacoma, where they were tricked into signing voluntary deportations and stuff like that. Wells Fargo invests heavily in the Geo Group, which runs that. Wells Fargo is also the landlord of the shithead sheriff in Arizona, Joe Arpaio. They rent him space, and he is, I said it before, I'll say it again, he's a shithead. He's the guy that just paraded a bunch of prisoners through the streets of Arizona, moving them from one facility to another, making a big show of parading these immigrant prisoners. He's a shithead. And Wells Fargo should evict him. So, for those reasons and many more, Wells Fargo, you're fired! Notice of termination to Wells Fargo. It has come to my attention that this bank participates in corrupt financial practices that have damaged the lives of working people everywhere. This is where you boo. Excellent. I should have brought my boo sign. I can no longer support this shameless behavior with my patronage. Therefore, due to violent disregard for public welfare, good job, gross mismanagement of public funds, devastating violation of public trust, willful and criminal undermining of the value of assets worldwide, you are hereby given notice that your employment as my bank is terminated. You are not too big to fail. You have failed. I am moving my money to a local financial institution that better reflects my values, one that is accountable to me and my community. Wells Fargo? Wells Fargo? Wells Fargo? Yeah!
The national group, the New Way Forward group, called the National Day of Action for April 11th, so we scrambled to participate in that because one always likes to be part of something bigger than ourselves. But there also are local things going on. There's a group called the Fire Your Bank group, which is urging people to move their money out of the big banks into socially responsible community banks and also into credit unions. And then we're trying to get the state of Oregon also to move its money, all the billions, many billions of dollars that the state has, into productive places rather than where they have it, which is in most of the same private equity and global investments that brought us into this problem. And then the last thing we want to do is to have a state-owned bank. In the same way that they did during the populist era, there's still one of them functioning in North Dakota, the Bank of North Dakota, which I urge you all to Google and find out all about because it's a wonderful example of what we could do if we decided to take control over our own economy. I think the level of anger and understanding on the part of many, many people in this country is more heightened than I've ever seen it since maybe the Vietnam War days. I wish people were out on the streets more. That's what we're trying to get to happen. But I think their consciousness has been raised dramatically by just the debacle we see on Wall Street and the greed. It's rather gross. Today in the New York Times, in the business section, the big banks were whining about the fact that they have to pay interest on the money that the taxpayers lent to them. Now, excuse me, we're talking the banks here, the ones who charge 30, 40, 50% interest on their credit cards. So, I have little sympathy.